Hello students, I am Raghavan Kumar Singh, faculty of US Academy and Institute. Today we will discuss class 8th history's first chapter, how, when and where. In this chapter we will discuss that why we study history and why it is so important to remember the dates and the happening of past of the different parts of the world. So let's discuss the chapter. How important the dates are. Have you ever thought why the dates are so important? Remembering dates is not so easy. Is it not an easy task? Or it is not an easy job. Moreover, it is not even an interesting task for many of us. But have you ever thought why we need to remember dates or why we should study history? Well, anything which we see happening in our surrounding must have begun on some day. For example, we drink tea or coffee, but how did it become part of our dietary habits and when it first come into use by man? Not only this, we also must have traveled by train. So, when did train starts in India? These type of such questions take us back to the notion of dates and time, but time is not always precise. Sometimes we even don't know about the exact dates or time of that particular happening. Why we can't fix a particular date? We can't fix a particular date because many of the things happen over a stretch of time. We know that Britishers came to India in 1608 or in 16th century, and then they started ruling over India from 1757. But do we know the exact date of the year 1757, on which day they started ruling over India? Similarly, if we move back to the example of tea, do we know the exact date on which Indians started drinking tea? That is why it is not possible to fix date for each and every event. Now the questions: why we associate dates with history? It is because in early times the court historians used records only the crucial events of a king life, such as his coronation, marriage, and the battle fought by him. So now we know why dates are important, and the question will also be arise: which dates are important? Which dates? A date doesn't become important if something big happened on that day in the past, but it gains its significance on the basis of how much keen we are to study the events which happened during a particular time. If we focus changes, the importance of the dates also changes. Let's take an example. The Britishers or the British historians began their history with the first Governor General of Bengal, Warren Hastings, and it continues up to the last Viceroy, of India, Lord Mountbatten. Their history mainly focused on the activities, policies, and the lifestyle of these men. It does not talk about anything else. Here, what we should discuss is that some other events were also happening at that time in India within the society, but nothing was put records for them. It is most important to know about the particular events. So, the chronology or the sequence of the lives of these Britishers mark a different chapter of Britishers history or British history. So, can we write history covering the events which are related to Indian society within the format of British Governor Generals? Yes, we can. And for this, we have to write it in a sequence so that it not only sound like a story but also the one which senses in the process of writing the whole story with a shift in the subject. We should be in a need of some new set of dates, making the old dates less significant, and thus a new set of dates will become important. So for that we have to periodize those events. So we have to periodize those events on the basis of the dates. In 1817, James Mill, a Scottish economist and political philosopher, published a massive 3-volume work, A History of British India. In this, he divided Indian history into 3 periods: Hindu, Muslim, and British. This periodization came to be widely accepted. We try and divide history into different periods to capture the characteristics of the time and its central feature as they appear to us. Moving away from British classification, historians have usually divided Indian history into ancient, medieval, and modern. According to him, it was necessary to introduce it is necessary to introduce European education and manner to them for their upliftment manner. Do you think that such an idea can be accepted? If yes or no. First of all, we cannot categorize Indian history as totally a Hindu history or a Muslim history, as rulers from both the religion and ruled within the same period of time. Moreover, many other faiths also exist in India. Simultaneously with Hindu and Muslim religions, they all are practicing their faith freely. Moving away from the British classification, the historians have divided Indian history into ancient, medieval, and modern. But this categorization also has some problems. Generally, we when we talk about modern period, It denotes the growth of science and technology, and also the freedom, liberty, and equality to the citizens of that society. But during the rule of Britishers, there were no such right given to the Indian citizens. Rather, they were forced by Britishers for one thing or another. Moreover, Britishers took away all the resources and wealth away from India. Thus, many of the historians treat it as a colonial period. One of the most important source of Indian administrators and classification between the history of India is the official records of British administrators or British administration. The Britishers believed that the act of writing was important. Every instructions, plan, policy, decision, agreement, and investigation had to be clearly written up. By the middle of 19th century, along with the spread of printing, multiple copies of these records were printed as proceeding of each government department. One of the most important thing is they are able to believe in the colonial process. We will discuss how Britishers established the rule in India and took control over all the territories, revenue, and resources of our country. They forced Indians to sell their goods at low prices and made them produce the crops they needed. The Britishers also brought changes in our culture, custom, economy, and taste. All these things refers to colonization of India. So now the question arises how we know about the happening and their time periods. So for this we have to discuss about the practicing of survey, also become common under the colonial administration. These records tell us what the official thoughts, what they were interested in, and what they wished to preserve for posterity. These records always help us to understand what other peoples in the country felt and what lay behind their actions. As printing spread, newspapers were published, and issues were debates in public. Leaders and reformers wrote to spread their ideas. Poet and novelist wrote to express their feelings. History is about the changes that occurs over time. It is about the finding out of how things were in the past and how things have changed in the present. As soon as we compare the past with the present, we refer to the time. We talk of before and after. If someone asks you when people begins to drink tea or coffee, you would fail to answer this question. It is because people did not begin drinking tea on a fine day or on a particular day. They developed the taste for it over time. Thus, you can only refers to a span of time, an approximate period over which particular changes become visible. Now, the administrative records, which was the most important records of the British administration, which they records rooms were maintained within the office of Tehsildar, Commissioner Office, and law courts. Specialized institutions like archives and museums were made in order to preserve important records. One of the important sources is record. The Britishers were of a view that each and every policy and agreement should be recorded so that it could be studied and debated if needed. This led to an administrative culture of writing memos, reports, and etc. Calligraphist, the one who writes beautifully, were also appointed in order to copy the important documents. Survey became important because the practice of survey became important during the time of Britishers. They wanted to know India in order to administer it properly. So they conducted detailed survey for following reasons: to map out India, to know the soil quality of the particular region, to know the sustainability or the suitability for different crops, to know the flora and fauna about the particular region, to know the local histories. And some of the survey conducted were as follows, such as botanical survey, archaeological survey, forest survey, geological survey. So what we can say is that we can get a lot of information from the survey conducted by the Britishers. But were these sufficient to serve a source to know history of India? Let's see. How do we determine that a particular set of date is important? Still, we have enough reason why we associate history with a string of dates. There was a time when history was an account of battles and big events. It was about rulers and their policies. Historians wrote about the year when a king was crowned, the year he married, the year he fought a particular battle, etc. For such events, specific dates were fixed. The dates which were selected, the dates around which we compare our history or story of the past, are not important on their own. They became important because we focus on a particular set of events is important. The histories written by British historians in India, the rule of each Governor General was important. These histories begin with the rule of the first Governor General, Warren Hastings, the first Governor General, and ended with the last Viceroy, Lord Mountbatten. We divide on the basis of mill. Mill was of the opinion that all Asian societies were of the lower level of classification than Europe. According to his telling of history, before the British came to India, Hindu and Muslim despots ruled the country. Religious intolerance and caste taboos dominated the social life of Indian people. British rule, as Mill thought, could civilize India. The British were absolutely prejudiced in classifying the Indian history, so the British classification of the Indian history cannot be justified. It is because a variety of faults existed simultaneously along with Hindus and Muslims in these periods. Apart from the British classification, historians have divided Indian history into ancient, medieval, and modern. This division too has problems. It is a periodization that is borrowed from the West, where the modern periods were associated with the growth of all the forces of modernity, such as science, reason, democracy, etc. Medieval was the term used to describe a society where these features of modern society did not exist. But the features of modern period were not visible in India during the British rule. Many historians therefore refers to this period as colonial. Colonial is a term that refers to a process in which one country subjugates another and thus bring political, economic, social and cultural changes. Historians use different sources in writing about last 250 years of Indian history. One important source is the official records of the British administration. The British believed that the act of writing was important. Easy instruction, plan, policy, etc. had to be clearly written up. The British also felt that all important documents and letters needed to be carefully preserved. So, they set up a records room attached to all administrative institutions. A specialized institution like archives and museums were also set up to preserve important records. By the early 19th century, detailed surveys were being carried out to map the entire country. In villages, revenue surveys were conducted. For the end of 19th century, census operations were held at the interval of every 10 years. It prepared all the detailed records of the number of peoples in all the provinces of India, noting information on caste, religion and occupation. All these are official records. These records do not always help us to understand what other peoples in the country felt and what lay behind their actions. To know about these things, we have diaries of peoples, accounts of pilgrims and travelers, autobiography of important personalities, etc. All these resources were produced by those who were literate. From these, we will not be able to understand how history was experienced and lived by the tribals and the peasants, the workers in the mines, or the poorest on the street.